Good morning, and welcome back to my series on dynamic philosophy. And my name is Jeff Corinter from Arcanum Holistic Clinic. And in today's video, I am going to be going into a topic I believe I may have mentioned in a previous video in this series, but it's certainly it's about time that I go into it in more depth. And we're certainly going to take more than one video to get into this, but today will be a nice introduction. Now, by the way, something funny just happened to me on the way to doing this video. I've already done this video, but to my horror, I discovered at the very end that my microphone was muted, so all you saw was me moving my lips. Apologize if you tuned into that, but here I am, and you should be hearing me now, and I will go back through my whole series of slides once again. So I guess I kind of accidentally got a little bit of a rehearsal in. I normally just do them just off the top, and I kind of capture them live as we're doing now. But anyways, that was just the funny thing that happened on the way to recording today. So let's get into the slides here. And our topic today is on something in general we've been talking a lot about, which is the whole dynamic physiology of the human being and how our thinking works and living thinking, if you've seen any of those previous videos. But the specific topic today within dynamic physiology is a very specialized concept. And actually, it's a very foundational concept. It's at the basis of how we apply medicine and everything that we do in Heilkunst. But as in all of these video series, I'm not here to give a medical lecture. I'm just using some medical concepts as an example for how anyone could take these concepts of dynamic physiology and really to enhance their lives, really to live your life to the fullest and have this deeper understanding of yourself and how things work and how to really unfold everything that's inside of you. So that's the general theme of the whole video series, but today's specialized topic is on the two beings, as I'm saying here on this slide. And what do I mean by the two beings? Well, usually when we think about ourselves, we think about a human being, we think about a person, even in the way we use language, of course, we think of people as being singular. There's one person, there's another person over there, I'm a person. So we just kind of add each person as one count. I'm one, there's one, there's another. So we just these singular human beings walking around. But actually, when you understand dynamic physiology, we come to understand that the human being is double. Like there are two beings inside of one, right? It's kind of like we're the ultimate 2-for-1 deal in the whole course of evolution. So this is what we're talking about today: the two beings. Now, as I say, it's at first, anyways, it sounds quite an unusual topic. It's not a way we're used to thinking, or that seems to make sense at first. But as a matter of fact, I'm just going to give you a couple of examples here. We have these kind of cultural examples that really illustrate this duality of the human being. And even if we go way back, let me flip my screen here, way back in the history of Western medicine, even this symbol I'm sure we've all seen is the caduceus, like these two snakes intertwined around Hermes' staff. Hermes being this kind of ancient Greek figure, and this kind of sits as the foundational symbol behind medicine. So you have to find that is fascinating. Once we understand these two beings making up the human being, well, it would have to make sense that the symbol of healthcare is this duality intertwined, this living function, these two living snakes intertwined with each other. And actually, I didn't pull this up as an image to give you as an example, but I'll just say it verbally right now. Like, even if you look at the strand of DNA in the human being, that's also, it looks very much like this ancient symbol, like the two strands of our DNA that are kind of spiralized or intertwined with each other. That's another really great symbol of this duality we're talking about. The other symbol of duality is, here we go, is this very famous drawing by Leonardo da Vinci, which is called Vitruvian Man. And I'm sure you've all seen this as well. And this is kind of a funny drawing at first, but again, it fits right into our theme. This is two human beings kind of superimposed on each other. And of course, that's not actually two people. That's really one human being with these, they're two inner human beings superimposed on each other. The four arms and the four legs, the two heads. This is us. This is me. This is you. We're all this double human being. Now, let me go back to my main notes here. So we saw the caduceus, we saw Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. Now, the big topic that I'm really bringing today, or the illustration that I want to bring forward, it's a very interesting historical illustration or incident, but it really illustrates a much larger point. And the big, and let me make my screen here bigger so you can see more note and less me. I'm just a talking head, but here, my notes are what's of interest here. And what's going on in this drawing, in this illustration, is really kind of a grand representation of the whole evolution of humanity, right? So if you start in the upper left, you get, our origins are way off in this grand cosmic realm, before we were in our very material forms like we are here and now, talking through this video technology. We started in a very different place. We started way off in this cosmic place, as I said, this upper left of the diagram where it says spirit. And the whole history of human evolution has been, at first, the first phase has been this descent of this spirit all the way down to the bottom of this diagram where I have the word matter. And then the phase of evolution we are currently in now, we're kind of just past that point at the bottom, that point where we touched down, deeply into matter, and now we're reversing course. We're heading back up to where we came, as it were. We're going to be heading back towards spirit. And the illustration that I used to describe this, we've seen this a million times, all the great movies, all the great stories, the great cultural stories that we've all heard. I used the example of the Lord of the Rings. Of course, that was a book series. It's all more recently been made a famous movie trilogy. And, that, like the big architecture of a story like that follows this pattern, right? If you take Frodo, this young little innocent reluctant hero, and he heads out from the Shire and he goes on these great adventure. It takes 3 very long movies, and then many, many hours later, at the very end, spoiler alert if you haven't seen these movies, but he comes back to the Shire where he left at the beginning after having gone all these grand adventures, and the Shire is the same, but he is different, right? He is kind of bringing something new back to the Shire. So this is going to be the story of humanity that we're in the middle of. Is we've evolved, this descending phase all the way down from spirit into matter, and as I say, we've started the ascent back up on the right side of this diagram. This grand ascent back from matter now back up into the spirit where we came from. However, things are going to be different, right? Through this whole process, this journey we've gone on, through the whole process of human evolution, is now we are going to arrive back where we started, as it were, but we are going to be bringing a very different consciousness to where, to, as I say, to what our origins are. As I say, we can talk a lot about that in future videos, but I just want you to have this general schematic in mind. Now, if you've noticed, one last detail to talk about on this drawing, I have 2 sets of initials here, RS and WR. Those represent these 2 historical figures I want to talk about today, which kind of illustrate this in a very unique way. And the RS is Rudolf Steiner, the founder of anthroposophical medicine, and the WR is Wilhelm Reich, who is the founder of orgonomic medicine. And I'm going to illustrate a couple of things from each of them in a moment, but you're going to see, just keep this diagram in the back of your mind. We're going to have this descent and then this ascent, and of course that's a grand, very long history in humanity. But we're going to illustrate something that, this point at the bottom of this diagram of matter, we're going to zoom into that right to the year 1923. There's kind of a very amazing historical crossover that happened between these 2 figures in 1923. So let's shift our note over to here. So Rudolf Steiner, as I said, who was the founder of anthroposophical medicine, let me move my slide here. his, bearing that drawing in mind, that descent and that ascent, the two arcs, when you look at Rudolf Steiner's life, he really represents the left half, right? Like if you study his whole history, like all his books and all the lectures he gave, um, for pretty much most of his life, he was more on that far left side of the diagram, talking about these great big cosmic topics. Like the book I have here on the screen, Cosmic Memory, Prehistory of Earth and Man. That's just a very typical title, a very typical subject matter for Rudolf Steiner, as I say, way off in this kind of spelling out this early prehistory of the human being, this great cosmic history, these great spiritual truths, all the kind of the origins of where we kind of came from and all that. But he's, as I say, anyone who's familiar with Rudolf Steiner will certainly be familiar with that kind of subject, that he spent many books, many hours of lectures, really talking about all these kinds of cosmic things. And so as I say, so there's Rudolf Steiner, and as I say, he spent his whole life on this side. But when you come all the way down to almost the very end of Rudolf Steiner's life, and he gave a lecture in 1923, and the name of this lecture was "The Invisible Man Within Us: Pathology Underlying Therapy." And it's quite an amazing thing, like given, as I said, what he spent most of his life doing. Suddenly now at the very end of his life, he introduced a very surprising subject, to his students and followers. And that came in this lecture, the Invisible Man Within Us. At this point, and it's almost like once you get to this point and read this lecture, you have to go back and reread everything else he did. And you now have to take this new idea and you have to insert it. Like it's almost like you have to revise or edit everything else he wrote and insert this concept he introduced at the end. It's kind of a funny thing that happened historically, but this concept he introduced, this invisible man within, really gives us the main topic of what we're talking about today, which is this duality of the human being, right? So in other words, the being that he introduced in this lecture is kind of, as he's calling it, this invisible man. It's kind of this great, this great cosmic being of the human being who kind of gets implanted into our physical existence, in our current mode of evolution. And it sits there kind of invisibly, as he says here in this title. We're not going to go through this lecture, but we will certainly come back to it, and we'll weave in and out through different details that he lays out in this lecture, and will really give a very dynamic picture of what's going on in human physiology. I just want to introduce the basic concept here as far as our overall orientation. So as I say, so 1923, this is the very surprising lecture that Rudolf Steiner delivered to his followers. But at almost the exact same moment, also in 1923, actually, this I should have had one more slide here, but just let's just sit here. This what you're seeing on the screen, we're going to talk about in a moment. This isn't 1923. This is Wilhelm Reich, where he came to at the end of his life. So let's just bookmark this. We'll come right back to it. But let's get back to 1923, where, as I said, Rudolf Steiner was at the very end of his life, and he delivered this surprising lecture and the surprising concept of this hidden being within us. And likewise, at that same time in 1923, Wilhelm Reich was just beginning his career, and he was a young psychoanalytic student. He was a student of Sigmund Freud, and he was following all the teachings of psychoanalysis and starting to learn about how to apply all of that. And at that time in 1923, Wilhelm Reich, he was, his whole life we're going to see is going to be a kind of a mirror image or an inverse of Rudolf Steiner's, where Rudolf Steiner started way off in the cosmos and spent his whole life kind of floating down. And then in 1923, he got kind of grounded into this nether being, this invisible man, this kind of generative sexual man. And that's precisely where Wilhelm Reich started at the beginning of his life. He started with that generative sexual man, that invisible being within, as Steiner said. And then if we follow Reich all the way through his life from 1923 beyond, this is where we come to this slide I have here, this final book he wrote. Actually, this is two books in one on the screen. Ether, God, and Devil is one book, but then his final book, Cosmic Superimposition, is where Reich has gone on this amazing, amazing journey from 1923 all the way to the 1950s here. And he took that primal human sexual function, and the great depths that he studied that. And again, we can do many, many videos just on that, like just really unpacking Reich, but we will save that. And where he came to after many decades, he took that original that original sexual being, as I'm saying, and he developed it all the way up to what his final book was called, Cosmic Superimposition. So as I said, he was kind of this inverse image of Rudolf Steiner. He started in that, in that deep sexual being, but he ended up way off in this kind of cosmic functioning being of man. This it was a very, very much an understanding of human thinking and consciousness and how we relate to these much bigger forces of the cosmos. So as I say, if we go back to our diagram here, this is exactly what I meant by those two initials, the RS and the WR. I was using those two individuals, Rudolf Steiner, Wilhelm Reich, as this really amazing historical occurrence, which illustrates this much grander evolutionary process of humanity as a whole. So as I say, where we look at the bottom of this diagram, where it says matter, and we use this historical moment of 1923, that's where Steiner and Reich kind of crossed over. Now, they never knew each other, but I'm just saying historically what they were each doing. There was this amazing, amazing crossover point in 1923. So just for me, that's a really cementing moment in history where we understand this much bigger diagram of human evolution as a whole. So I almost swiped on my computer screen here. Let me go back to my iPad. And so we looked at the 1923 lecture. We looked at a bit of Reich's history and where he ended up with this book, Cosmic Superimposition. And this is, as I've been doing in all of this video series, of course, there's a lot of medical concepts and a lot of philosophical concepts that are behind all of what I'm saying. And we will certainly be talking more about all of that. But as I've been doing in all of this series, I don't want you to get tripped up in any of those. If you're not deeply into dynamic medicine or dynamic philosophy, that's okay. That's not our purpose here. The reason that I want to do these videos is so we can introduce these concepts and to help you realize you can take them out, take this idea of the two beings, and like we've been doing in all the other videos, really help it to enhance your life. Like once you start to get to know these two beings within yourself, you can really get to that ancient Greek a piece of advice to know thyself, as I kind of say tongue-in-cheek here at the bottom of this note. Now that you have two beings, or now that you realize you have two beings, it's going to be twice as hard as you thought to know yourself, right? Because now you're not just knowing yourself presumably as having been one being, but now there's two. You're gonna have twice as much work to do. So thank you again for joining me on this video. And as always, wherever you have picked this up, be it Facebook or YouTube, whichever platform you're on, the future videos will continue to come there. So continue to follow along on whatever channel that was. Please add any questions or comments you have in the little box below, and I will pick those up in a future video and weave them into whatever topics are coming up. So thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.